Hi everyone to this next session. Let me read the official title. It's Making the Invisible Visible Data, Databases and AI Metaverse. I'm Francis Hanger. I'm artist in residence with a project called DATAUNION at VUB. Here you can see the logos and who sponsored it. With me are my dear colleagues. We have Rocco, Bellanova, who's the leading PI of the project, and Vanessa, Ugolini, who is postdoc and colleague of mine. And they will sort of comment on my presentation. I'm going to talk about 20 minutes, 25-ish maybe, just showing my art projects, and then they will begin to frame it a little bit more, how this feeds into a research project that we are undertaking currently now. Of course, I had to decide which works to show, and I'm showing a selection of works that focuses on databases and artificial intelligence as infrastructure. So the aim is to render the invisible visible, like for instance, data or data structures and so on. And you will see very diverse and different strategies, artistic strategies and tactics to do that. Thank you. So here is one work from 2013. It's called Deep Love Algorithm. It's actually an installation and a video. For shortage of time, I won't show the video, but it's online on my website. So this work is purely fictional, and it's a cooperation with other artists, a photographer and a sound artist. And also these two actors are friends of mine. And the storyline has two protagonists. Jan is a journalist and Margaret is an editor, and they go out on a journey to find out when, why, and how databases were invented. And they also look into the utopian potential of database technology. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating two figures to talk about infrastructure and technology and how it emerged in a way. And this is, of course, it doesn't try to be a scientific history of database infrastructure, but it's more like a very personal view and dive into this history, maybe close to one of many genealogies. So here we see part of how it was installed in place. So you have this kind of board on which the projection goes. This is a 20-minute video with photos, and they are followed by text, a little bit like chat messages. So as a visitor, you really need to take some time to see that it's very slow in a way. It's also trying to work against the medium in a way, like not the speed of text messages, but it's almost a little bit boring, but I would rather use the word contemplative for that. So Margaret, one of the protagonists, it turns out then already lives much longer than it appears, and she might be a cyborg or not, so it's not really becoming so clear. And at some point, the protagonists are close to fall in love with each other, but somehow it doesn't work out. And there are, in the work, over the time, there are a few very sad love songs, for instance, by house legend Mark Kinchen with singer Alana, or by Aretha Franklin, or by Ugolini, which reflects the time when the work was made. And this sadness is kind of a reference to the tragedy of database technology, which could have been used for utopian uses, and we might come to that maybe in the discussion, but is mostly ended up as being a tool for data extraction nowadays. So it was a very difficult spatial situation how to present the work, because the space, this was at Bergen Triennial, I was invited to, was difficult. It had this incredible, crazy small piece of wall there which separated the room. This also for an art exhibition, a checkered floor is like really a difficult thing to deal with. You want to have something more neutral. So you see, I'm talking a little bit more about the formal side of it. So I reacted to that with the display solution on the left, and then on the right there's another display which kind of repeats motifs from this display. And there are these smaller towers which have prints on them from the history of computing. So if you walk around in a space, you have different angles or viewpoints on how to kind of ingest the work and how to maybe also create your own understanding of the work. Yeah. Let's see, okay. So then another project I would like to talk about, that's 2 years later, database Derive. It builds on a sort of technique of the situationist, a artist group around 1968 in Paris, where they walked together through the streets of Paris as an artistic practice. Mostly I imagine it as they were going around drinking and talking, but it's called Derive now, and it was an exploration of urban space. So in the database Derive, participants were given sort of small tasks to note observations, and we were strolling through the streets randomly by throwing a coin. So basically at each corner we were throwing the coin and then going either left or right or straight. And this whole thing was a good sort of reason to hang out together and talk about databases and looking at the visible ends of databases such as ID numbers. So here we have a tree on the street in Berlin that has number 291. Then data entry forms, for instance, with ATMs or logins. And we basically worked through a theory of Geoffrey Bowker called the infrastructural inversion, where you try to inversely look into infrastructure from its visible ends. And this was a way to explore the materiality of databases just by walking around the city, and it addresses also the question, how is data created, how can we experience it? And what was very valuable in the format for me was that I was also able to learn from the participants. So it was not just me distributing knowledge, but it was more like really having a talk and people explaining stuff to me. For instance, here, this post box, it was told me, has a barcode inside, so whenever it is being emptied, then the person who empties it scans it into a device, and the post knows, okay, this box has been emptied, and from that we can again deduce that it is connected to some sort of database. You see, I'm fast tracking through the project, so this is already the next project, adversarial.io from 2020. This was a project in collaboration with the hacker Mr. Fluchke. We looked into adversarials. It is, I explain that in a minute. It's a subversive platform to manipulate images, or I have to say it was. Every image that is uploaded is given an adversarial noise pattern, and in the consequence, artificial so-called neural networks would fail with classification. Let's go into detail a bit. Okay, So what you can do then is also you can download your picture with the added noise and use it elsewhere. It's sort of a stealth technology against machine learning and pattern recognition. And what actually happens is, so you upload your image, there's a Python script, it detects the content of an image first, it then gradually adds pixels to that image, and it pushes the image over a certain, or the pixels in the image over a certain threshold, so that the classification, the original classification here as tabby, is skipped, and a new classification appears, which is usually relatively close, but it's not the same. So here it turns out as lynx and catamount, and to the human eye it seems to be the same picture, but through these added pixels, which are individually calculated for each image, you have a failure in recognition by the machine. The image then can be downloaded and saved and used for your own purposes. So the idea basically was to create a kind of a working model to demonstrate this would be possible, and my hope was actually that companies like Apple or whoever would pick this up as a service, just add it to the camera stuff. It never happened, of course. And, yeah. Here we see some more of those noises created. So sometimes you even can roughly see a certain structure in the noise which reflects on the image, the original image. So why am I talking in the past about this project? So we began working on it in 2019 based on a scientific paper on adversarials. So it's not our own invention or so, but we brought it into a artistic project, I would say. The model that we were working against was Google Inception v.3, which at that time, 2019, 2020, was kind of at the height of what was going on. And only after 2 or 3 years, we realized that technology had moved on already, and it didn't work anymore against the new models which were in use later. So we closed down the project, and we just have it as on the website as a documentation to be sort of faithful to the potential users. So we didn't want to mislead anybody into thinking, okay, I can actually use it. It was more a demonstration. But it's also, of course, a demonstration of the question of power, because if we would have enabled ourselves or have been enabled towards like really building up a company or something like that, I think it could become a viable product. But I'm an artist. I'm not interested in building a company. So I was talking with several other people who were interested in that and trying to take it from there. But as far as I know, nothing so far realized. The good news is that adversarials still exist and they still work, which also has to do with the point that there are through mathematics, there are general ways of applying general adversarials to images. So I'm kind of sitting on my hands and waiting for the next person to pick up on that and make a bigger thing out of that. It also helped me a lot to understand the conceptualization of what is called AI more as a, at least in the field of visual images, as an optostatistical machine. So we are not talking anymore about questions of understanding and grasping concepts, but more about statistics and computation of statistics and statistical material. More or less each image that is being processed is kind of compared to a statistical field of other data. Yeah, here is, yeah, as always with these presentations, so this should have come before. Here you see just in Inception version 3, you see just the output number 323 of the so-called neural network. It gives a certain class, that's monarch, butterfly, and if you are able to move this output to the next class, then something else is being detected in an image. We kind of also knew that we were onto something when we realized that, for instance, there appeared captures like these. These are not exactly adversarials, but somewhat close, basically using humans to train machine learning processes, also working with pixelated or wrong images. And actually what we kind of don't know, what is also a question to research, is of how many of those captures are actual tests for adversarials that are then clicked by humans to retrain networks. Yeah, so the strategy here is artistic intervention, poking AI application, creating a test case. Yeah, next work, that's 2021. So for friends of mine who know me, yeah, I didn't get this law from you because you don't know me, but this person actually is as far from me as possible. So that's me in a disguise, trying to be a entrepreneur. So the data proxy, that's how the project is called, is a fictional scenario in the near future. And in this future, everybody is ordered by law and by the state and by the government to produce a certain amount, a minimum amount of data per year. And of course, people are overburdened, so the data proxy comes in as a counselor, as a consultant, a little bit like a tax consultant, and helps people by telling them how to produce more data or the amount needed. There's a website. This should. Yeah, okay, yeah. So there's a website, that's the business website for this data proxy, and I'm offering not just my services, but of course also free. Yeah, there are the services, and then there's also free advice, of course, for people. So some fake reviews, of course, fake featured in, everything is fake, yeah. But that's basically the art piece in it, like you're constructing the situation and you're trying to pretend something. And then what was scrolling relatively fast now, I produced a series of 6 vlogs, which were published on YouTube and also via this website. And in each vlog, I'm talking for about 10 minutes about certain aspects of what the data proxy does, how he gets his clients, like how to be successful in this business. And by that, of course, being able to talk about something that is like really difficult to talk about in art, and that is data, yeah. And not just data in the sense of, I'm measuring the wind at the airport, and then I make a visualization of that, and depending on how strong the wind is, the more my visualization is in the red or in the blue. So these kind of works we have seen a lot. I would call them data transformation works, but here it's more, I'm trying to talk about structures, about principles, and again, trying to make the invisible of infrastructure visible. Let me see. Okay, so here's a script for one of the vlogs. That's maybe a little bit boring. This is my studio, basically my home from which I recorded. So I was also interested in delving into the influencer culture and like really trying to find out in how far I could bring it with as an influencer. I can tell you, not very far. It's a tough and really demanding job. It really took kind of a lot of effort. Here we see a little bit from the process of cutting the material to impersonate an influencer, but and I imagine that also the influencers then who are actual influencers who are much better than I in this, they have to impersonate still to a certain level. And then also make yourself dependent on the data ecologies of YouTube. There is here we have the fake comments, of course, that all my friends contributed. I'm very grateful to them. Yeah, and here's maybe a work which I worked on most recently, and for time reasons we can't dive much more into it, but it's I'm trying to do some mapping, and I just gonna go into one example. Let me see. Yeah, so here I'm trying to map out different aspects of the, not of AI itself, but of the discourse about AI. And here I'm mapping out two what I perceive as phantasms of artificial intelligence. So one narration goes, that's on the left, robots gonna serve humans, new technologies free us from the hardships of human life, such as labor. But it on a psychoanalytical level, it also is a sadist relationship, because we kind of tell the robots what to do and they have to comply. And then in popular depiction in movies, you have the figure of the caring slave. So you see some names, Rachel Tyrell, Samantha, Data from Enterprise, and so on. And then it also looks into ideologies that work with that. This is accelerationist and effective altruist. And on the other side, there's this phantasm of being dominated by machines. And often the one phantasm can turn into the other. So you don't necessarily have just one end or the other, but often one is working into the other. So we are being dominated by machines. Then intelligent machines dominate humans and humanity. It's a masochistic relationship in psychological terms. There's going to be an enemy overlord ruling over us all. Then we have the Ava and Terminator, Robocop, superintelligence as popular depictions of that, and the ideology for that is long-termism. And in that way, I developed further the whole mapping, looking really into the sort of a cultural critical reading of the AI discourse. And now let me go to the project that I'm working with here at the moment. So this is just a very small peek. So this is not an artistic project yet. This is something that I'm working on with my colleagues who will take over in a second. And here, and I see you photographing it, but really don't take it for granted. This is like very early research. We're trying to map out a system or a project called Prüm II of the European Union. And I'm going to build a artistic project on that, of which I don't know yet how it will look like. And I'm very grateful that my colleagues are taking the chances with me. And now I would lead to Vanessa. The next slide should be yours. It's already on.
Oh, it's already on. Thanks. Yes. Let's try.
Yes.
No, it's yours.
Okay, one more.
So then maybe you just ask. Okay, then great. Yes. Right, okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Francis, for presenting your work. And hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the VUB here in Brussels. I'm not an artist. I have a background in critical security studies and science and technology studies. So what I'll try to do here is to kind of present the encounters that we're trying to create with Francis and his work, while in fact he's contributing to our project called DATAUNION, where we're trying to study the interoperability of large-scale information systems at EU level. So my task here today would be to kind of try to weave the thread between his presentation and what we aim to do with this pilot project of Prüm II, so the second generation Prüm. And what I'll do is to give you a little bit of background of the project and the history of Prüm first, and then I'll try to kind of make explicit where these encounters, where and how we can create these encounters with artistic work, such as the work that Francis just presented. So, first of all, to get started, okay, I'll take over from the map that he just introduced. It's a chart, actually, that he created based on the inputs that we gave him on what we know about the proposal to implement Prüm II, so a second generation Prüm. And he cleverly created this sort of chart to try to map out the main aspects of the Prüm architecture. And again, the question when we met with Francis was how to make invisible, the invisible transparent. So how to turn what we cannot see of the Prüm architecture into something more tangible. And so we kind of started to steer the discussion away from the algorithms, which is what we cannot see in the chart, and more towards a discussion about data and the databases that make up the Prüm infrastructures, as well as the practices at stake, especially data practices. So guided by this question of like invisibility and how to turn it into visibility, we kind of started to kind of borrow some insights from Francis and to kind of make sense of this chart. And first of all, a little bit of background on Prüm for those of you who are not familiar. So the history of Prüm, which is a network, and well, actually it's like a framework for cross-border exchange of DNA, vehicle registration data, and fingerprints. At least this is Prüm I, so the existing framework. And you can see it in a representation provided in an impact assessment document like that, basically. The history of Prüm traces back to a history of moves towards the more systematic exchange of information for law enforcement purposes. And it's a history which finds its roots in the policy progress that has been made since the adoption of the 1990 Schengen Convention, then followed by the 1995 a decision to establish Europol. It then continued as a story with the adoption of the Hague program and the Swedish framework decision, which aim at diluting the national boundaries of law, which were preventing the cross-border exchange of information of specific categories of data. So especially the Hague program and the Swedish framework decision prescribe two principles of mutual recognition and the principle, sorry, of availability, which indeed aims at lifting the sovereign power of member states over the collection, retention, and use of data. So bearing in mind this background of Prüm and this history about the more systematic and like to kind of try to speed up information exchange and make it more efficient and quick, we have also to bear in mind that these kind of policies were merely at the beginning declarations of intent. But so one of the first question that we can use as guidance to explore the Prüm infrastructure is to how these declarations of intent, how these policies kind of shifted from intended scope to actual implementation. And we are talking about technological implementation. So from technological possibility to operational actuality. So in the context of Prüm, this switch occurred in 2008 with the incorporation of the so-called Prüm Treaty in the EU, in EU law, with the adoption of 2 Prüm decisions, the so-called Prüm decisions. And this decision indeed prescribed the establishment of a decentralized network of national databases used by police forces across the EU and which currently encompass information systems that store DNA, fingerprints, and vehicle registration data. So if we just fast forward to from Prüm I to Prüm II, so where we are at now, we are trying to examine what's going on, first of all, in terms of policies and what the future system will look like and the affordances of these new systems. So the Prüm II proposal was put forward in 2021 in December, and we now have a regulation of Prüm II, which was adopted on the 13th of March 2024, so it's very recently, 2 months ago. So it's still all in the policies. So again, we don't know how the system will look like, but there is already an infrastructure in place, and that's the Prüm I infrastructure. So we want to explore, we want to try to make visible this invisible and all the technical fixes that are prescribed through the Prüm II infrastructure, and to see what the impact of these technical fixes are, because indeed they are not a miracle technical fix, but there is much more to that. So, first of all, as you can see a change in the foreseen new architecture with the adoption of a central router. We started from there and we asked the question of where is the algorithm in all this, right? So where's the algorithm that makes the data flows across the different components of the Prüm infrastructure? And well, this question resulted from a discussion that we also had with Francis, and actually the straightforward answer was it's nowhere, at least not in the regulation. And so second question was, which algorithms are we talking about? Because in fact, the regulation doesn't even name one algorithm. And are we even able to name algorithms? Because we always talk about algorithms without even distinguishing among the different algorithms. So in fact, going back to the slides, the algorithm is not there. So what we're trying to do with Francis is to kind of look for the algorithms by forgetting the algorithms. So try to shed lights on different components of the architecture in order to try to find the algorithms and how it works in context of Prüm. And so I'll just zoom in on different aspects of the map for now. in order to try to look for these algorithms. And the first is the router. So the main difference, as you recall from the previous image that I show you between Prüm I and Prüm II, is that the regulation prescribes for the adoption, for the setup of a router, which compared to the previous framework of decentralized databases aims to centralize the searches for data, but not the data per se. So the data will still be stored in the national databases, in the Europol databases, but what the router aims to do is to create connections among these databases in a more centralized fashion. But so what's a router? So that's also a second question that we had and that we discussed with Francis. And simple answer would be it's a piece of electronic equipment, it's a device, but it's a device that not only connects different computer networks, it does more than that. And in fact, it is hidden in the same word, in the router word. So basically, it's not only to connect, but to route something from one place to another in certain ways. So the word itself prescribes some movement, right, in the data, a movement that obviously is going to change compared to the previous architecture. So if before it was like a decentralized network with member states matching data with other databases, and that prescribed the implementation of bilateral connections among member states, now we have this concept of trying to route information in a different ways. And if we, well, first of all, if we look at the regulation, the router is under the management of EU-LISA, which is the EU agency for the operational management of large-scale IT information systems in the era of freedom, security, of justice. And quoting from the regulation, the router is composed of a central infrastructure, which includes a search tool, which enables the simultaneous querying of national databases and of Europol data. Second, it's made up of a secure communication channel between the central infrastructure and the competent authorities which are authorized to use the router, and also Europol is connected to this communication channel. And third, a secure communication infrastructure between the central infrastructure of the router and the interoperability, actually the new interoperability components, such as the European search portal, which would enable, by these same connections created by the router, to route data not only across the different national databases which are part of this new architecture, but also to, it's possible to launch like a parallel query through this connection of the router with the European search portal, and thus having access to other EU central databases such as the VIS, Eurodac, the entry and exit systems, and others. So it's a massive change. And Prüm is just like, Prüm II is just a small case. In fact, it's a pilot for us, but it's a pilot also at the European Union level. But obviously there is more to that, because it all fits into this new interoperability narrative which is going on right now. So obviously this is still preliminary, but obviously, as I just mentioned, one of the implications is that the information itself, that it will flow in a different way, okay, through the same concept of the router. And so the router, it's not only a technical fix, it's not only a technical component which is added to the previous architecture, even though it is kind of sold in that way, that's kind of the narrative, but it will change many things in the previous architecture, in the way data are accessed, in the way data are searched, who can access those data, and the way also the authorities will operate on the ground in relation to the matches and the hit or no hit derived from the router. So this is obviously simply like an illustration of like the power at stake and how this all changes with the application of a certain technology as prescribed by a policy, like a regulation. So, and here comes the second, second aspect that I'd like to kind of zoom in. And this leads to automation, still in the search of algorithms. So we zoom in on a specific aspect of the router, the regulation, the Prüm II regulation prescribes the automated search and exchange of DNA, fingerprints, facial images, vehicle registration data, and police records. So there's also an addition of more and more data. So before it was only DNA, fingerprints, and vehicle registration data, but now there is more. And obviously even these kind of fixes, small technical fixes, implies much more to that, because for example, to be able to search for facial images, you need to have the technologies. And obviously, background, they conducted feasibility studies, Deloitte conducted one, and then, you know, impact assessments on the availability and the readiness of that technology. So there's much more going on than just like a small technical fix in the architecture, and there is much more than just algorithms to that. In fact, automation needs obviously like a common infrastructure on top of the already existing national infrastructures, and it will also include like, for example, a common data format to be able to exchange all the different kind of data that I showed you earlier. And obviously the aim is to kind of reduce the human labor, right? And upon the promise for a better police work, faster and more efficient. And so automation, if we kind of zoom in on these aspects, so automation, we are also here we're trying to look for the algorithms. And here there is definitely an AI aspect to it, because in the case of Prüm, even Prüm 1 works through like a hit, no hit system. And but now this system has been automated. So even the way that member states, like the national authorities and the EU-level authorities, such as Europol, that have access to Prüm data, now will operate differently. So we are already starting to see a change in their own practices, because it will not be just national contact points that receive the request and then send it back. But now everything is going to be automated, in fact. So it will change the way in which the request for certain kind of data prescribed by the regulation, so all the different 5 ones that I show you, will be sent back by other member states and also by Europol and the database under Europol. So what we're starting to see, it's a sort of like, it's a chain of operations, to kind of borrow from a media artist and media theory vocabulary. And this is where like the kind of talks with Francis are being more productive, because we are starting to shed light on different aspects of the infrastructure, and we are explicitly borrowing from him and his vocabulary to kind of try to illuminate what all these changes means. So Well, so the kind of, well, obviously this is a provocation to forget the algorithm, because as I mentioned earlier, we're not saying that there are no algorithms there, but obviously there is definitely more to that, okay? So what we're trying to do is to look for the algorithms by forgetting it and by zooming in on other aspects of the Prüm framework. And I'll just be brief here because I'll give the floor to Rocco, but as I show, like, not only there is more to that, but also we can borrow from like a media artist in order to kind of conceptualize these changes. And as I mentioned, in terms of, for example, automation and all the different technical fixes and new components of the Prüm architecture, this implies also a change on the ground for the national authorities and EU-level authorities that have access to this new infrastructure. And so also beyond automations, the way data will be rooted in the future, it also prescribes some forms of transaction. So now, probably next steps in the project will be to look more to terms such as transactions, addressability, and chain of operations, and also to look more to, you know, all the different situated practices at stake and how they're going to change. So I kind of made some addition to the previous slide in order to claim, bearing in mind the provocation of forgetting the algorithm, but to change the approach from an AI approach to a database approach, because from this preliminary observation, what we've seen is that, for example, an AI approach would prescribe to a model of the world created from a data corpus, okay? Whereas what we're seeing here and what a database approach prescribes is like a very conscious and precise modeling of the world by making indeed decisions about the data model. In fact, of the data that you want to include in a certain system, the data that you want to exclude, because that is also telling, and so of the non-data, so everything that it is excluded from the architecture. So this is still preliminary, but it will be probably, I mean, we will take it from here. And now I'll just give the floor to Rocco, who will kind of delve into the different metaphors, as also in the title that we had, make them visible, data databases and AI metaphors, and how we can borrow from media theory and where the encounters between science and technology studies and media theory is. So, yeah, you want to, okay.
If it's fine with you, I will stay put here, sit. Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thank you, Francis. Always a few seconds to get used to my own voice over the micro. Thank you very much, because I think that the challenge always when we speak about infrastructure is to remember what probably the most important scholar working on infrastructure, Susan Leigh-Starr, used to say: infrastructure are boring things. So when you compare to most of the debate that we have had about algorithms first and now artificial intelligence, to speak about Prüm II is quite boring, let's put it bluntly. That's not the excitement of large language models. There is not the excitement about how artificial intelligence is going to revolutionize what we think in terms of cultural production, human being, and so on and so forth. And that's a little bit the way in which we were approaching through this project, DATAUNION, the fact that, okay, maybe if we only focus on artificial intelligence, maybe if we only focus on algorithms understood as this kind of esoteric entities, kind of self-autonomous completely cut out of the world and at the same time very powerful and mysterious and changing the world we inhabit, we are missing something. And the thing that we are missing is actually the infrastructure and the boring things that create the condition of possibility of all of this. And not only of artificial intelligence or algorithms, but also of major changes in the way in which we consider, for example, the liberal state or the constitutional liberal state. I think that one of the main important elements was the limitation of power and the fact that we silo to some extent a specific source of knowledge to, as a cascade effect, silo specific powers of the police, not only understood as law enforcement, but the police understood as a specific way in the German sense of order in a society, and that's the only way we know it. In fact, there are two things probably that we have problems forgetting. One is capitalism, and the other is police understood as Polizei, as understood as a way of ordering the world through statistics, notably, and through the important role of knowledge. And interoperability from this point of view was a huge question mark. It used to be a huge question mark 20 years ago when the Commission first started to discuss about interoperability, and you started to have all these debates saying that it's not actually only technical issues, but it's also a question of power distribution, and you have a certain element from law scholars starting to say actually it's constitutional issues, especially in Europe. And in Europe it's a beautiful example if you want to imagine, because it's about not only making interoperable database within a specific order, constitutional order, but across Europe. And I was thinking about what we now call Prüm I, retroactively. I think it's already a 2004, 2005 initiative, and I was thinking about what was the debate back then. And it was quite interesting because the debate back then was somehow similar to the one that we may have now. It was, without using the word sovereignty, it was very much about sovereignty at the beginning, because the first initiative was actually an international treaty, because European Union institutions were not so willing to go towards something like Prüm, and it included also other elements like the possibility of auto-pursuit, so the possibility for the police to cross the border in the middle of a pursuit in case of danger and risk for the life of the people involved. It was about air marshals at the beginning, and then it was dumped down, so to say, to reduce it only to the core digital part, or most of it, and that's the part that was uploaded, let's say, at the European level, but with a lot of conflict about data protection, privacy. I know that, nobody now feels like very threatened by the question of DNA being exchanged, but 20 years ago it was a huge thing. Like just the idea that the DNA was to move somehow across Europe was a big thing. And so there were a lot of debate with the UK, a lot of debate within Europe, but there were also no database about DNA in all member states. So there was also this element that here I'm really connecting with the collaboration with Francis and Vanessa. One element that thinking from an infrastructural perspective is that even when we just focus on creating the condition of possibility, we start to play this game of what is under the first turtle. There is another turtle, and sometimes there is no turtle, so we have to generate a turtle. And for example, some member states had to create a national DNA database to have the possibility to exchange DNA database. So you see that even if the legislation at European level was only foreseeing the possibility of exchange, it de facto created a sort of input or a push towards the production of data and their storage in a database and the creation of a new database. And this, I'm not making a judgment whether it is good or bad, but it is important to think how this was happening. Prüm back in the days was actually quite a progressive approach because of this hit-noise system. And this idea, like to put it in a very simple word, the fact that instead of pushing the full data set with your name, surname, and other information, we were only providing a sort of a template-friendly extraction of data that will be able to be matched automatically, so in theory without human intervention, and only in case of hit, so of a flag, saying that there is a certain statistical suggestion, evidence will be a too strong word, that there is a match, and then we should start all the formal cooperation and the exchange of the full data set and so on and so forth. And I may be wrong, there are probably people in the room that knows that better, but I believe that the first time that they started to cross-match DNA database between countries, the database and the system was crashing, because we're not just used to exchange so much data. So this also tells us a little bit about the infrastructural power of the state and the fact that we were arriving at Prüm after several years of neoliberalism and disinvestment from digital infrastructure, which again fits back into the recent debate that became hardened after, and especially during the COVID pandemic, about the fact that we are so much criticizing, I would say often rightly so, big platform and big actor and big tech and so on, but often states, even in the West, or the most rich states in the West, have very difficult to fix or infrastructure that need a lot of work or that are just absent. And so we also realize that the modern state without digital infrastructure or data infrastructure is a state that has issues, that probably has to rely on the private, which opens up all the political debate about which kind of states we want to live in. Not only in terms of whether the real problem or the most urgent problem is the empowering of law enforcement, or whether it's the weakness of the public authorities because they do not have the relevant infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So the idea was very much to go back to the infrastructure, to think it as a place where the condition of possibility are defined. This condition of possibility are something that one works through and that has to create. And I'm thinking about one of the metaphorical concept, or the concept to core that Francis is suggesting us, which is coming from German media theory, that is cultural technique. And one way to define cultural technique is to think about the way in which media and things, I'm here quoting Wiesmann, are defining the actor, and so they are creating and shaping the way in which actors that we take for granted are to act and to become, and so on and so forth. And like, I believe that we can all think about Ulysses as one of those rising actors that moved out of a sort of if you allow me this maybe unpolite metaphor, janitorial position, the idea of maintenance, to a key actors, like is not completely by chance that a router, which is something that they will be taken care for, is so central also in the map. It also gives a clue about the fact that when you think about the picture that Vanessa was showing you with the stars and so on, it's not Vanessa poor capacity. In fact, she is not the author of that image. Is European Commission. Yeah, no, the nice one are Vanessa. The ones that are not so nice are often coming from European institutions, which are not responsible for what I'm saying, as a disclaimer. But it's quite significant. This vision of Europe moving from like a one-to-one to having a central router that is giving a sense of European Union and European integration. Obviously, like the question is which kind of European integration are we talking about, and very much the sense of the project, and is to try to think, okay, if we are moving toward this kind of infrastructural major overall change, Prüm I again is 20-year-old, and I'm not 100% sure that is fully implemented still. So that's also maybe the second element I wanted to emphasize in the fact that there is a certain rhetoric and hype around artificial intelligence as something that is immediate, understood both as lacking a medium, lacking a materiality, but also immediate in temporal terms. And okay, I know we are studying a very niche topic like European security cooperation, and the moment you stop thinking about Minority Report, you discover that everything is very different from what many also critics imagine European cooperation to be with regard to law enforcement. And it takes years, it takes decades. It's like 20 years since Prüm I. And probably we are trying to leapfrog with Prüm II, and it will take time. The interoperability regulation have been adopted in 2019, had been already discussed more than 15 years ago in terms of initial ideas, and it was not even there completely an issue, and we are still postponing because it takes time. It takes an awful amount of time, and the question of time, as a colleague of ours is noting in Amelung, is an important factor of political, it offers on one side the possibility to reopen the conversation about how we want to do it. It opens an important conversation, I believe, for the data protection community in terms of saying, like, how do we do it in practice? It's like part of the job has been to assess before, to say whether it was fit for purpose, it was democratic, and necessary and proportionate and so on, but then you have to deliver, you have to do it in practice. How do you supervise something like that? Who is responsible for that, with which means, with which infrastructure for supervision and so on and so forth, for instance. But on the other side, a long time also, and that's her main argument, for instance, and I believe that she has an important point, is the fact that it also make all of this again became invisible. It's so long, it's already boring. How do we keep the tension up? Who remains responsible for that? Even at the institutional level, how does it cascade or not into the meanders, the maze of technical bodies and so on and so forth that will end up making huge important decision about that will have a huge impact. One of the notion that Francis is proposing us is to think about the materiality of data, but also the materiality of what he calls non-data. Non-data may be simply the fact that an Excel sheet is missing an entry. And I was thinking about some of the work that has been carried out in another project led by Annalisa Plitza, and when they were starting to compare the possibility of like what you can insert as an asylum seeker in terms of defining your own position, the fact that not all member states have the same kind of definition, like cohabitant légal in French, like in Belgium, does not exist in all countries. It means that some of your trait, some of your elements that are so important for you individually because of love, of belonging, identity, and so on, but also have a legal standing in some specific case, disappear. If there is no entry for cohabitant légal, cohabitation légale, you have no claim or linked to that. So it has a huge cascade effect that has a life-changing experience on you in terms of possibilities. So making this decision about what gets into a common form at European level is not so mundane, in fact. It may look like a minor things compared to discussion about artificial intelligence and copyright, but for many people will have a way more far-reaching effect. So the importance to try to keep engaged with that. And this brings me to the last point, and the work with artists is amazing. It's very challenging also because what we are trying to do in conversation with Francis is to try to escape one of the pitfalls of, but I also understand like that will have been my own tendency when starting to think about these kind of things. We tend to think art as either completely separated from our topic or representational. That we have done the research, then we call Francis, we say like, here is the paper, can you make it nice so more people will read it? And what we are trying with Francis is something a bit different, is to try to go in parallel, like the way in which it was very amazing the first time we did it, like how do you approach Prüm, like Prüm II, like you try to read the proposal, you try to open up to impact assessment, to the Deloitte opinion in this case, so on. So you end up with a corpus of thousands of pages, written pages with some graphics, and that's it. Most of it, and then you try to do semi-structured interviews, meeting the actors, reading some report, some press release, and so on and so forth. But this is a very specific way to get into the topic. We come with some concept and so on. What if you do it from an art perspective? How do you mobilize? How do you approach it? How does this become the beginning of the journey and not the end of the journey? Like in most cases, this will already be the final output. And the idea is, how do you start with that? How do you start to problematize it? How do you keep the conversation going? How do you think in a different way about those things? Especially because they're boring. And I think that the boringness of it is a very important element. We, like now, it's self-evident that we have a full 3-day conference on artificial intelligence. In the 50s, like it would have been considered extremely boring topic. So there is an infrastructure, there are conditions of possibilities that make this enticing for us today. And this is not yet enticing. So how do we make it enticing? How do we build up a public around that? Thank you very much, and I think that we may have still 5 minutes for exchange. Jan? Diana? I will do it.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Francis, Vanessa, and also Rocco for this experience here. So my name is Jan Ellermann. I'm working as Senior Specialist in Europol's data protection function. And CPDP is always great for surprises, because you think you come for panels and all of a sudden you find Europol as part of an art project. So this is very cool. So I enjoy this presentation a lot, because I think it's a way also to think a bit out of the box. So maybe one remark I would like to make is that Prüm, of course, as you alluded to yourselves, is only a small part of a bigger interoperability agenda. And for Europol, the implementation of that agenda has to follow a certain process. So here I'm thinking about data protection impact assessments, which were already briefly mentioned. So I understand that is something you also look into, which then feeds into the artistic approach again, which again I find very interesting, and I would encourage you to also keep in touch even, because I see opportunities here. So maybe then the interoperability DPI.ai process is the first one where we can also attach some artwork as reference material, then potentially to visualize it. But again, maybe a bit more seriously, the process we are undergoing, I sense a lot of question marks here. How is this going to look in practice? And then maybe to share some insights. You're not alone in this. So this is a layered process, basically, where we are looking at a legal framework which then over time needs to be implemented. And DPI.ai is the logical first step. But at Europol, whenever we talk data protection impact assessment in the operational domain, and this is the operational domain here we are looking at, whenever the DPI.ai leads to a high risk identification, we can't do this on our own anymore, but we have to pull the EDPS as our external data protection supervisory authority into the boat. So this is maybe in very general terms where we are. Prüm 1 is there. Prüm 2 to be implemented, ETIAS watch lists, for instance, to be implemented. All of these processes are queuing, let's say, for data protection impact assessments. What we can clearly see already now is that in terms of volumes of personal data, the whole interoperability agenda is going to skyrocket data processing, including at Europol. So we are confronted here with a real challenge, because we're going to have to process so much more than we are currently processing, that this has resource implications, including for the data protection function at Europol. Because we are currently 8 colleagues working, so that may sound a lot to you. It's indeed the biggest data protection office within the EU institutions, I mean the agencies, as far as we know. But then 8, very soon 9, is not a very big number to deal with what you are outlining here. So let's work together. That is my plea to get it right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think there was another.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very fascinating discussion. I love the idea of including artists in your research methodology, and I'm really curious to see what you come up with. I was wondering if you'd consider any other similar methodologies like ethnography or anthropological approaches, and whether the Europol actually would be open to having researchers walk around and look over your shoulders.
Thank you very much. Christian Ramsar from the OECD. I understand that the purpose of this, let's say, enterprise is essentially to raise awareness. At least this is my interpretation. If not, please, what is the goal that you are trying to achieve at a societal level? Clearly, it would also kind of a suggestion for next time if we could have more time for discussion, because I think that raising awareness is a way to requires dialogue. The third point, and this is actually the, let's say, intellectual question that I have, is why the focus on infrastructure? What was the motivation to think to have that concept? There could have been other concepts that you used, but you decided to focus and to frame this as an infrastructural debate.
Give it back to Rocco. I have no question. You can have the microphone. I have no question. I'm just helping.
Okay, we can continue the conversation bilaterally, I think. Thank you very much for your question. We have been kicked off, but yeah. and thank you for, and maybe one last word for both of you.
Yeah, just thanks to the organizer for creating the space for discussion, I think.
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to reply, but since we don't have time, but yes, very quickly. Well, thank you, and absolutely, that's actually the second step. So the idea is also to come to Europol and, you know, to just actually enter the facilities and see what's going on there. So absolutely, which goes back to your question very quickly in terms of methodology, for sure, like this is just the beginning. And we don't know yet how the art project will develop, but to integrate in terms of methodology, the art project, of course, we plan to do some field work. First of all, Europol, and you know, some semi-structured interviews. So we also come with our own legacies in terms of disciplines, right? And for sure, it's going to be even more enriching to even take interviews and field work to an artist. And we'll see where it goes. We don't know yet, but. Thank you, and yes, maybe bilaterally for sure, I guess. But thank you everyone for coming.